Hey darlings. A little girl gave cookies to the garbage collector every week until one day the father followed the garbage collector when he saw what the woman was doing at night. He was horrified. In a bustling city, Pedro's restaurant shone like a jewel. Among the buildings worn by urban life, the aroma of traditional Mexican dishes mixed with the vibrant sound of the conversations and laughter of satisfied customers inside. Pedro, a robust man with eyes that seemed to observe him. He oversaw every detail, ensuring his establishment maintained its reputation for excellence. He took pride in every compliment to the flavor and decor that evoked the vivid colors of an ancient and festive Mexico. Clara, Pedro's daughter, observed the world from a different perspective in her small room. And decorated with colorful fabrics and children's drawings, it contrasted drastically with the essence of the restaurant that shared the same walls with her father's house, and she sat by the window, her eyes greens reflecting a mixture of curiosity and compassion that only children possess. Clara often thought about the stories behind the people she saw from the window, especially the most humble ones who, despite the difficulties, showed resilience in every step. Dad always says that we must help those who have less, Clara muttered to herself, observing a familiar figure. It was Lupita, the garbage collector, a short woman with gray hair tied in a loose bun. Every day without fail, Lupita. She was walking down the street from the restaurant, pushing her cart full of possible discarded treasures. Clara saw her as someone of incredible strength, capable of finding where others only saw trash. She must have so many stories to tell, Clara thought, her mind spinning with questions she wanted but hesitated to ask. Pedro, on the other hand, viewed Lupita with a mixture of suspicion and contempt. Clara, you need to understand that not everyone on the street has good intentions. We must be careful about who we approach. Especially near the restaurant, she expressed when she saw her. Looking at the lady, her firm voice, trying to instill in her daughter a caution that she considered essential for success and clear security. Listening to her father, she felt torn between her vision and her own intuition while Clara watched Lupita. On another day, noticed the careful way in which the woman examined each item found, as if each piece of paper or plastic used could somehow be essential. She seems so determined, so focused. She will have a family. She will have someone waiting for her at home, Clara thought, her mind filled with a growing desire to understand and help. One day, moved by curiosity and compassion, Clara decided that she would do something, anything to help Lupita. Maybe she can start with something small, something that won't make Dad angry. With me, something like cookies. Yes, cookies. Dad will never notice some cookies unless he planned an idea born in his mind. With that decision, Clara felt like a heroine of her own story, ready to make a small but significant difference in the world of Lupita. On a particularly busy afternoon at the restaurant, Clara found her chance while Pedro was absorbed in a conversation with a supplier. She quickly slipped into the kitchen, her eyes fixed on the tray of freshly baked cookies with the dexterity of a girl who knows her business well. Territory. She took some cookies. She wrapped them in a paper napkin and hid them under her blouse. Clara's heart was racing, but the excitement of the mission drove her when she left the restaurant. Clara saw Lupita carefully handling his cart nearby, timidly approaching. He caught the attention of the collector with a gentle whisper, "Madam." The woman turned around, surprised at being approached, her eyes showing caution. Instant look, "I brought you this. I'm clear." "What is your name?" Clara said, extending the package of cookies with a trembling hand. Lupita looked at the cookies and then at Clara, her hardened face softening her. "Although misteriosa with the lady, seems like she needs a little affection, and I like to help, but please don't tell." "My father is our secret," Clara confided, feeling a touch of pride at her little rebellion. The conversation between them was interrupted by quick footsteps. Clara turned to see Pedro walking towards her, a worried expression on her face. Panic made her act quickly. I have to. Leave Lupita, see you later. Clara ran back to the restaurant before her father could see them together. Lupita left behind, adjusted the package of cookies under her shawl, and quickly walked away, a shadow of worry crossing her face as Pedro looked back, arriving at the place where Clara had been alone. He saw Lupita walking away. His presence near the restaurant worsened his distrust. I already told him not to hang around here, he shouted at the beggar woman out loud, his tone carrying an intimidating firmness. Lupita, without responding, continued his his hurried walk, showing that he had something more important to do. Back at the restaurant, Pedro found Clara, pretending to concentrate on her drawings. That woman was here again. You need to stay away from her. Clara, those people can be dangerous, she warned him, her concern disguised as irritation. Clara looked at him with her big green eyes, innocence painted in every feature of her face. I don't know what you're talking about, Dad. I was here the whole time, her voice said, a perfect balance of confusion and sincerity. The days continued to pass after that conversation. Every Thursday, as if it were a sacred ritual, Clara met Lupita in the corner of her father's restaurant. The distant sound of cars and conversations in the background served as soundtrack for their talks that week after week built a bridge between two very different lives. Clara waited for those moments with a mixture of anxiety and joy, checking the clock several times before sneaking away with some biscuits hidden in the bag. When she saw Lupita approaching, her face lit up. How are you today? Lupita asked Clara with a sincerity that transcended her young age. Lupita, with a smile that softened the hard lines of her tired face, responded with maternal warmth. I'm better now, dear. You know, these little moments with you are the bright spots of my days. As they talked, Lupita shared pieces of her life, each story intertwined with teachings and memories of simpler times. In one of those encounters, while Clara handed out some cookies, Lupita began to speak about his childhood in the countryside, about the stars that seemed closer and brighter there. He clarifies how beautiful it was to look at the sky at night. It seemed that each star had a story to tell, just like us. Now Clara, fascinated, listened to every word, imagining that starry sky and the adventures of young Lupita on the other side. In the restaurant, Pedro was beginning to notice the frequency with which the cookies disappeared. He observed the employees, but his instinct told him that something else was happening. Later, he decided to check the security cameras, and to his surprise, he saw Clara taking the cookies. His heart tightened with a mixture of worry and irritation. What is he doing? Why is he acting secretly? The frown asked as he watched the scene repeatedly. The distrust towards Lupita only increased one day. Determined to face the situation, Pedro followed Clara discreetly, saw when she met Lupita and gave her the cookies, hidden, observed the interaction of the two. The way in which Lupita, she looked around cautiously as if she were keeping secrets that she did not want to reveal. This woman could be a bad influence on Clara. I need to protect my daughter, he thought in his mind, weaving scenarios of hidden dangers. When returning to the restaurant, Pedro decided to broach the matter during dinner. Clara, I have noticed that some cookies have disappeared lately. Do you know anything about this? He asked, trying to keep his voice neutral, but his gaze was intimidating. Clara, catching her father's serious gaze, hesitated for a moment before answering, "Oh, I don't know, Dad. Maybe the employees are eating," she said, avoiding his gaze, feeling a pinch of guilt for lying. But she knew she needed to protect Lupita and her encounters. Pedro sighed, not completely convinced, but decided to leave the matter for the moment. I just want you to be honest with me, Clara. It is important to always tell the truth, he said, leaving a clear message. Clara nodded, feeling torn between her loyalty to her father and the desire to help Lupita. That night of mine, she was preparing to sleeping. Clara thought about Lupita, the strength and the stories of that woman who had taught her so much. I need to find a way to continue helping without worrying Dad, she murmured to herself, determined to keep her small act of kindness in mind. One of those days, on a night when everyone had already left the restaurant, Pedro was carrying out his final tasks, one of which was the least pleasant but necessary, was to take out the garbage accumulated from the day while he pushed the heavy container towards the back of the restaurant, his thoughts still orbiting around the discoveries of that afternoon and the conversation with Clara. His heart, although heavy with paternal concern, was also impregnated with a growing suspicion against the figure who now. I saw Lupita checking something near the trash. Her presence was like a shadow that threatened the security that she valued so much. Pedro suddenly saw Lupita and observed her for a moment. Her gaze hardened when she saw her there. What does this woman really want? Why is she always hanging around here? He thought as a mixture of irritation and curiosity drove him to make a hasty but firm decision to continue. The night had completely fallen now, and he could only see her silhouette moving cautiously through the streets. Poorly lit, he followed her from afar, taking care that his steps did not make noise, his heart beating a rhythm of alertness and suspicion. After a few minutes that seemed eternal, Lupita arrived at a small, improvised construction, little more than a pile of sheets of metal and wood, Pedro hiding in the shadows. He watched as she entered. Moments later, he heard the sound of a fragile and innocent childish voice coming from inside. Pedro's heart froze. A girl? What does a girl do in a place like this? The idea that Lupita, she could be involved in something wrong, like the kidnapping of a girl. It made him feel a mixture of rage and terror. Taking a deep breath to control his fury, he advanced towards the entrance, pushing the door with a force that denoted his anger. What are you doing with this girl? Who is she? You kidnapped this girl, she shouted, her voice echoing in the confined space, scaring the little girl who was snuggling against Lupita. Lupita was visibly scared, and with a trembling voice, she responded quickly, trying to calm the situation. No, sir. She is my granddaughter. Miguel, I take care of her. She has no one but me. I stammer, the words coming out in a nervous flow. The girl looked at Pedro with big, frightened eyes, clearly traumatized by the sudden invasion and the threatening tone. Pedro, still inflamed with rage, but now also confused with Lupita's explanation. He continued to sternly question, and where are her parents? Why is she here in this place with you? Her questions, although harsh, revealed an underlying concern for the well-being of the trembling girl. Lupita explained that Miguel's parents had died, leaving her in his care. I do the best I can to take care of her. Sir, we are not doing harm to anyone, she said, every word impregnated with a defensive desperation. After hearing Lupita's explanation, Pedro felt torn between compassion for the situation of the girl and the suspicion of allowing her daughter to approach such poverty and desperation. Stay away from my daughter, he finished with a severe tone, turning to leave the place, the shadows of the night falling on him as he moved away, his mind still turbulent with what he had discovered the next morning. When confronted with Lupita, the atmosphere in Pedro's house was charged with palpable tension. Pedro, still shocked by the discovery the night before, anxiously awaited the moment when he could talk to her. Clara sitting at the breakfast table, the sound of cutlery and the smell of freshly brewed coffee did little to soften the seriousness that Pedro felt. Clara, we need to talk about the lady you have been helping, began Pedro, his firm voice and his gaze fixed on his daughter. I discovered something last night. That woman Lupita has a very small child with her. I am worried. Clara, I don't think it is a safe environment for a child, and I fear that he may have been kidnapped. He said, every word full of concern, paternal mixed with the suspicion that the night's incident had awakened. Clear, upon hearing her father's words, she felt a mixture of fear and confusion. The idea of the kidnapping scared her deeply, and seeing the seriousness on her father's face, it only intensified that feeling. Dad, I didn't know about the child. I promise I won't help Lupita again. I don't want to cause problems. Clara thought so much about Dad while pretending to agree with Pedro's concerns. As soon as Pedro left for the restaurant, Clara began to make a new plan. She knew she needed to act discreetly. In order not to alarm her father again with the now empty house, she went to the kitchen, a place where she felt comfortable and inspired. There she gathered the necessary ingredients to make cookies, something she had seen her grandmother do many times. Restaurant, then I'll make my own, Clara determined. As she measured the flour, sugar, and the rest of the ingredients, Clara worked with intense focus, following the steps of the recipe she remembered by heart, mixing the ingredients carefully, forming a dough that, although not as perfect as the cookies from her father's restaurant, seemed promising. With the oven already preheated, she placed the small portions of dough on the tray, her heart beating with anticipation after long minutes that seemed like hours. Clara opened the oven to inspect her work. The cookies had spread a little too much, and their edges were more brown than I intended. They weren't perfect or nearly as pretty as the ones her father sold, but a taste test revealed that they didn't need to be pretty to satisfy someone's hunger, Clara thought, a smile forming on her lips as she tried a piece, heartfelt, encouraged by her small success. Clara wrapped the cookies in a clean kitchen towel. Lupita and her grandson will like these, I'm sure, she murmured to herself as she planned how and when she would deliver her new batch of cookies in that kitchen among molds and ingredients. Clara not only created cookies, she molded an act of gentle rebellion and an extension of her heart. Generous, ready to continue her mission of care and compassion regardless of the obstacles. When Clara saw Lupita approach the restaurant again in the same building as her house, her heart was filled with determination. She had already prepared the homemade cookies carefully wrapped in a kitchen towel, and he was anxiously waiting for that moment. He approached Lupita with a cautious smile, observing the woman's tired and worried expression. I know we shouldn't meet, Lupita began, her gaze wandering nervously around to make sure they weren't being watched. Your father came to talk to me. He was very angry and said things. He said I should stay away. Clara shook her head, interrupting Lupita with a determination surprising for her age. I don't care what he said, Lupita. I know that you're not doing anything wrong. She extended the cookies towards the woman, the cloth making a soft noise. I made these cookies for you and your grandson. I wanted them to have something delicious to eat, Clara said, her eyes shining with a mixture of pride and rebellion. Lupita looked at the cookies, gratitude evident in her eyes. Thank you, my dear. This means a lot to us, she said, accepting the cookies with trembling hands. You are very kind. Clara, I don't know how to thank you. Although happy to be able to help, the girl felt that it was time to address the topic that Lupita was so worried. My father told me that you have a grandson. He wanted to know more about him. If you feel comfortable talking. Clara asked, her natural curiosity mixed with genuine concern for the child's well-being. Lupita sighed a little. Sound loaded with memories and past pains of my little Miguel. He is all I have left of my daughter. She died in childbirth. It was something terrible, and Miguel's father, well, never took responsibility. He fled right after the tragedy. Since then I have taken care of him. Miguel alone, explained Lupita, her voice choked with emotion. Clara listened attentively to each word, increasing her admiration and sympathy for Lupita. The love that the woman felt for her grandson was evident, and the sadness for her lost daughter was palpable in the air between. I am very sorry to them, Lupita, you and Miguel. They are very strong, Clara said, her voice soft, trying to offer some consolation. Lupita smiled sadly, caressing the cloth that wrapped the cookies. We try to be strong, dear, and people like you who show us kindness make all the difference. Thank you for not believe the bad things that people can say, responded her loving gaze, settling on Clara with the burning determination of a girl who believed in the goodness of small actions. Clara asked Lupita to take her to meet Miguel. His eyes shone with the innocence of youth and the hope of doing something good. Please, Lupita, I would really like to meet Miguel. Can I ask Clara? Her voice was full of enthusiasm and compassion. Lupita, however, shook her head, worry marking each line. Her wrinkled face, no, Clara is too risky. If your father finds out, things could get worse for all of us, Lupita explained with a seriousness that she rarely used with Clara. Maybe if one day things improve between me, you and your father can introduce you to Miguel. But Clara, moved by a mixture of curiosity and a fervent desire to help, did not give up. That afternoon, while the sky began to be dyed with the tones of a twilight that promised a quiet night, and knowing that her father would soon return, Clara made an impulsive decision and followed Lupita from a distance, hiding in the shadows and carefully turning corners so as not to be seen. Lupita, who was walking with quick and determined steps towards her improvised shelter, did not notice the little girl figure that discreetly followed her. It was only when she reached her humble abode and heard a slight noise from her that Lupita turned and saw Clara, standing with a look of who knows she has crossed a limit. Clara, what are you doing here? I told you it was dangerous, Lupita exclaimed, her tone mixing surprise and reprimand. Clara, taking a deep breath, responded with a mixture of apologies and firmness. I needed to see. Lupita needed to meet Miguel. I promise I will be careful. Lupita's expression softened when she saw the sincerity and concern in him. Clara's eyes with a sigh nodded, allowing Clara to enter her house. The space was small and simple, but there were signs that it was a lovingly cared for home. Miguel, a little year-old boy with big, curious eyes, looked at Clara with a mixture of curiosity and shyness. Clara approached, slowly smiling kindly at Miguel. Hello, Miguel, I'm Clara. I brought you some cookies, she said, extending a small package. The boy murmured, something difficult to understand due to his age and speech still developing, accepting the package with a hesitant hand. The three of them sat on the dirt floor of the small building. Clara watched Miguel tenderly while he tried a cookie. Lupita began to tell more about the life they led there, the difficulties and small joys. Clara listened attentively to each story, strengthening the bond. What did I feel with those two human beings who, despite all the adversities, showed incredible strength? As the conversation developed, night fell outside, reminding Clara that it was time to go back. She got up reluctantly, knowing that those moments spent there were precious and rare. I need to go, Lupita. It's getting late, Clara said with a note of sadness in her voice. Lupita, understanding the situation, also got up. I'll walk you home, Clara. It's safer if we are together. Lupita offered a gesture of protection and affection that reflected the bond that they now shared. Clara, feeling grateful and relieved, accepted with a nod, preparing for the way back under the protective mantle of the night. Meanwhile, Pedro walked back home, his steps echoing in the silence of the night that was beginning to fall over the city. As he walked, a whirlwind of thoughts assaulted him since the conversation with Clara about Lupita and the child, a feeling of doubt beginning to settle in him. Your heart, am I being too hard on her? He asked, his face marked by an expression of concern. The memory of his late wife, Clara's mother, came to mind, bringing with it the softness and understanding that always. It showed what she would think of all this. He reflected, feeling a pang of guilt for perhaps not acting the way she would have acted. He decided to change to being a more understanding and less strict father. Pedro felt a renewed hope of reconnecting with his daughter, of really listening to her and understanding her feelings. But when he got home and didn't find Clara, his heart tightened and anger began to take control again. Where could he be at this hour? Worry was mixed with frustration, thinking about the worst few minutes later, while he was still searching the house for any sign of Clara, he heard footsteps outside. When he opened the door, he saw Clara arriving accompanied by Lupita and little Miguel. His face instantly hardened and the questions began to arise like a torrent. Where were you with? Who do you think you were? You are walking. This is irresponsible, Clara. Lupita, sensing the tension and potential conflict, Tried to explain Mr. Pedro. I swear I was just trying, but was interrupted by Pedro, who with a raised voice accused. You tried to kidnap my daughter. It's not enough with that poor little boy you have with you, Clara. Seeing the escalating situation, she quickly intervened. No, Dad. It was me who followed Lupita. She didn't even want me to go, but I insisted, and in the end, she just wanted to accompany me home. To make sure she arrived safely, please don't fight with her. Clara's words made Pedro's gaze stop in surprise, and then reflection took over his face as he processed what Clara had just said. Realizing that perhaps she was reacting impulsively like so many other times, shame began to replace anger. Look, I'm sorry she exploded like that, but I know you understand, she murmured, still trying to maintain a firm stance, but her voice betrayed a touch of gratitude. Thank you for bringing my daughter to accept. Lupita, turning towards Clara, ordered her to come in. Clara needs to talk. When Clara passed by her, her eyes met Lupita's again, this time with renewed calm. She thanked her again. Thank you, Lupita. I really appreciate in a way what you did, but please understand my concern. I just want to protect my daughter. Lupita, by understanding Pedro's position and recognizing his efforts to be more polite, he nodded. I understand, Mr. Pedro. I will do my best to respect your request in the manner. May it be possible for me today? For example, I tried, but it was not possible. Pedro closed the door behind him with a sigh, the events of the night still weighing on his mind as he headed to the living room to talk with Clara. He found her sitting on the couch, her distant gaze reflecting the tumultuous thoughts that occupied her. He sat next to her, his soft gesture trying to establish a connection before starting the conversation. Clara, I know you have a good heart, Pedro began, trying to inject compassion into her words. That is something wonderful, and I am happy that you want to help people. That shows how special you are, Clara. She looked at him, sensing her father's attempt to soften the tone of the conversation, animated by the anger of her father. Clara took a deep breath and decided to take advantage of the moment to suggest an idea that he had been considering. Dad, do you think you could give Lupita a job at the restaurant? She really needs help, and I know she would work hard. Pedro frowned at the suggestion. The idea took him by surprise. Employing someone who lived on the street in her mind brought more complications than benefits. Clara wouldn't do that at all. She lives on the street. She doesn't know anything about how to work in a restaurant like ours. That's not something simple. She can't. Simply bringing someone out of nowhere to work in an environment like that, he responded, involuntarily raising his tone of voice with irritation. Clara became a little discouraged. Hearing her father's response, the sadness evident in his eyes, Pedro immediately noticed the change in expression of his daughter and felt a knot in his heart seeing the impact of his words. Clara, please, try to understand. I only want the best for us, for the restaurant. It is not as simple as it seems, he said, his voice softening as he tried explain his position. Seeing that the conversation had taken an emotional turn, Pedro decided it was time to take a step back. He stood up. He kissed Clara on the forehead and said, "Good night, dear. Think about what we talked about." "It's okay." Clara nodded, still in silence, processing the conversation while she watched her father retire to his room. Going up to her own room, Clara lay down on the bed, but sleep seemed far away. Her mind was active, reliving the conversation, thinking about Lupita and Miguel. The determination of helping them somehow grew inside her despite her father's words. The next morning, after a restless night, Pedro was getting ready to go to the restaurant. He found Clara in the kitchen having her breakfast. "I'm going to the restaurant," he announced, trying to maintain normality. "Have a good day, Clara. See you at night." With a gesture, he left, leaving Clara alone with her thoughts. As soon as the door closed behind Pedro, Clara began to plan. She knew that despite her father's rejection of the idea of employing Lupita, there were other ways to help. She thought of bringing more clothes and even some toys for Miguel. They need more than just cookies to live well, Clara murmured to herself, determination strengthening in her heart. She began to make a mental list of what she could carry, considering what could be more useful and how she would be able to transport everything without her father noticing. Clara, motivated by an impulse of solidarity and empathy, decided to act while her father was in the restaurant and went up silently to the attic, where boxes and more boxes kept the memories and belongings that had once been her mother's. Among them, she found a box marked Bazaar full of clothes that her mother had collected to donate, but that were never delivered. Clara reviewed the clothes, selecting carefully those that seemed most suitable for Lupita and little Miguel. After choosing the clothes, Clara went down to the kitchen to prepare a bag of Tom food, such as bread, some vegetables, canned food, and she did not forget include a package of cookies. Thinking about how Miguel's eyes shone when he received them, finally he remembered the toys. He went upstairs again and found some old toys of his that he knew he wouldn't use anymore, but that could bring joy to a child like Miguel. With everything ready, he spied around the window, making sure her father was well away before leaving. The day was clear, and the sun was shining high in the sky, perfect for a secret mission of kindness. Clara walked the path to the place where they lived. Lupita and Miguel with quick and determined steps, the weight of the bags balanced by a feeling of purpose. When they arrived, they found Lupita outside their improvised house taking care of some plants in small pots. Lupita looked surprised to see Clara arriving loaded with bags, but her face Clara soon lit up with a smile. "What is all this?" she asked while helping the girl put the bags on the floor. "There are some things to help them, clothes, food, and some toys for Miguel," Clara explained. While Lupita examined each item with growing gratitude, "I just wanted to do something more for you, something that my mother would have done." Lupita hugged Clara excitedly. "You are an angel, dear. Thank you for thinking so much about us," she said with tears in her eyes while Miguel played happily with the truck and the doll. The two sat down to talk. Clara then brought up the idea that she had in mind. "Lupita, I would really like to see you working in my father's restaurant. I think it would be good for all of us," she said. Hopeful Lupita, however, doubted Clara. "I don't know, I don't have experience in restaurants, and your father doesn't appreciate me much anymore. It would be difficult to convince him," she responded, pondering the complexity of the situation. Clara was not discouraged, "I know, but I would be so happy to see you there. Maybe we can find a way to show my father that she can be a good employee. We can think of something together," Clara suggested, her voice full of optimism. Lupita smiled, touched by the girl's unwavering faith. "Let's go see Clara. With you by my side, maybe we can make your father change his mind," she said, allowing herself to feel a glimmer of hope as they talked. Time passed gently, and Clara knew she would soon need to return home. But in that moment, that small act of generosity had reinforced the bond between the two of them, a connection strengthened by love. Promised to try together to change their circumstances. At Pedro's restaurant, lunch was in full swing, and an unexpected situation demanded their immediate attention. A problem with the payment system was causing delays, and he needed documents that were in his house. To resolve the issue with palpable urgency, he decided to call Clara, hoping that she could bring what he needed. With no answer on the phone, Pedro felt a pang of mixed irritation and concern. Determined to quickly resolve the problem, he left the restaurant and went to his house to look for the documents himself. When he got home, Pedro expected to find Clara in some quiet corner of the residence, but the house was strangely silent and the room was empty. Clara's absence aroused an intense anger deeper than usual. Where could she be now? She thought, her heart beating with a mixture of fury and fear. However, an idea soon took shape in her mind, a suspicion about where Clara could have gone. She must be with Lupita somewhere else. Once he concluded, almost certain that he knew where to find her, he headed to the place where Lupita lived. Pedro was boiling inside, preparing for the confrontation that would surely come. "This has already gone too far," he muttered to himself in indignation. Boiling as he imagined what he would say to Clara and Lupita when he found them. Upon arriving at Lupita's makeshift house, Pedro decided to approach cautiously, not wanting to cause a scandal or scare his daughter. Hiding for a moment behind a nearby fence, he spied what was happening. Inside the humble refugio, there he saw Clara and Lupita talking animatedly with Miguel playing next door. The scene before his eyes was one of tenderness and care, not the dangerous and disastrous scenario that he had imagined. Pedro observed how Lupita treated Clara with kindness, and as Clara was clearly laughing at ease and happy watching their interaction, a wave of emotion washed over him. Anger began to dissipate, replaced by a feeling of understanding and even shame for having judged the situation so badly. Perhaps he mistrusted her without out of necessity, he reflected, recognizing the goodness in his daughter's heart and in Lupita's, deciding not to interrupt the moment. Pedro backed away silently, returning to his car with a new perspective. As he drove back home, he meditated on the harsh words he had said and the hasty actions he had taken. What can I do to make up for it? He asked himself, aware that he needed to somehow repair the damage caused by his mistrust and anger. Meanwhile, Clara and Lupita finished their long conversation. Clara looked at the clock, and she realized that she was already very late. Lupita, sensing the urgency, offered to accompany her home. It's not necessary, Lupita. I can run, Clara responded. Thanking her with a warm smile, she quickly said goodbye and she ran down the sidewalk, being careful of cars as she crossed the streets to get home before her father noticed her long absence. Clara entered the house, her heart beating rapidly, prepared for the possibility of a confrontation with her father as soon as she had crossed the threshold. From the door, when she saw Pedro sitting on the sofa in the living room, which made her stop abruptly before he said anything. Clara began to apologize, the words rushing out of her mouth, "Dad, I'm sorry. I just wanted to." Pedro interrupted her, raising a hand to gently silence her. "Clara, everything is fine," he said, his voice surprisingly calm and understanding. Clara hesitated, confused by the change in attitude. Pedro continued, "I saw how you and Lupita treat each other. It's not what I thought. I'm very sorry for having reacted that way before." The relief Clara felt was immense. She sat next to her father, still a little shy with the turn of events. "Pedro." Then he started talking more about Lupita. "I realized I was just walking away and doing the most difficult things for the two of us. I want to be closer, Clara. I don't want you to feel like you need to hide things from me." Clara looked at her father's eyes, full of a mixture of hope and caution. "Dad, if it's really necessary, I can stay away from Lupita. I don't want to cause problems," she offered, ready to make that sacrifice if it was necessary to rebuild her relationship with her father. "No, it's not necessary," Pedro responded quickly, shaking his head. "I don't want you to stop seeing Lupita. In fact," he paused, choosing her words carefully, "I've been thinking about what you said about giving her a job at the restaurant. Maybe we can set up an interview for her. What do you think?" Clara's expression lit up instantly. "Seriously, Dad, that would be amazing. Lupita would be so happy, and I'm sure that Miguel would also be super happy, and I too," he exclaimed, barely being able to contain his excitement. The next morning, Pedro met Lupita in front of the restaurant. The sun was still low in the sky, casting a golden light on the street. Who was beginning to get agitated with the morning movement. Pedro came up to her, who seemed surprised to see him there so early. "Lupita, good morning. I was thinking about a conversation I had with Clara. It would be about the possibility of you working in the restaurant." Pedro began, trying to convey both respect and enthusiasm by the idea of having to redeem an unkind act from before. Lupita, although clearly moved by the offer, she looked at her own clothes, visibly worn and dirty from the daily difficulties of her life. "Mr. Pedro, I thank you very much, but look at how I am. I'm dirty," she said, her voice filled with a mixture of gratitude and excitement. "I don't have the right clothes to go to an interview, much less to work in a place like your restaurant." Pedro observed Lupita's hesitation. Noticing the shame in his eyes when mentioning the condition of his clothes, he smiled slightly, an expression of understanding and empathy forming on his face. "Lupita, don't worry about that. We have uniforms in the restaurant, and we can take care of that part as much as possible." What is important is your willingness to work and the ability that you can bring to our team, he said, encouraging him in a kind voice. Lupita, still incredulous but moved by the gesture of trust and support, nodded slowly. If you really think I can be useful, she began, her voice still full of uncertainty. I would be totally willing to try it for my granddaughter, for my sons-in-law, even if they are not very good. Perfect, answered Pedro with a broader smile, guiding her into the restaurant. The place was already prepared for the work day, with the aroma of fresh coffee filling the air, and the meticulously arranged tables sat at one of the farthest tables, creating a more reserved and comfortable environment for the interview. Pedro began the conversation with simple questions about the previous experience of Lupita, but soon the dialogue deepened, touching on more personal aspects of her life. Initially shy, Lupita began to open up about her past. I worked as a kitchen assistant many years ago before my life changed completely. She shared her low voice. When my daughter died and left me with Miguel, things became very difficult. We had nowhere to live, and I needed to take care of him. Pedro listened attentively to her increasingly understanding expression. And how Miguel takes care of himself when you are not around, he asked, genuinely interested in understanding more about Lupita's life. Miguel is a very smart and careful boy. He knows how to stay safe, and we have neighbors who check on him when I need to go out. It is difficult, but he is very brave. Lupita explained, pride and concern mixed in her words. As the conversation developed, Pedro felt a growing admiration for Lupita. Her strength and resilience despite the adverse circumstances touched him deeply. He found himself not only moved, but also convinced that the decision giving you a chance was right. Lupita, I think you would be an excellent addition to our team, Pedro finally declared, the tone of his voice reflecting his decision. I would like to offer you the position of cashier. I think your skills and your life story will bring a new perspective to all of us here at the restaurant. Lupita was visibly moved, a gleam of hope and gratitude emerging in her eyes. I don't know what to say, Mr. Pedro, except thank you. This means a lot to me and for Miguel, she said, the words almost lost in a sigh of relief. Pedro stood up, smiling with satisfaction at the decision made. You can start tomorrow. Oh, and let me get a uniform for you, he said. Going to the counter where the uniforms were kept, he returned moments later with a clean and well-ironed uniform, handing it to Lupita. Here you go. Welcome to the team. Lupita accepted the uniform, feeling a mixture of pride and expectation for this new chapter in her life. She knew that this opportunity was not just a job, but a chance for real change, to rebuild her life and offer Miguel a more promising future. Lupita was about to leave the room, already dressed in her new uniform, when Pedro called her again. She turned around with a questioning expression on her face. Yes, sir. Pedro hesitated for a moment, pondering his words before speaking. Lupita was thinking, while you are working, and while Clara is on school vacation, you could leave Miguel with her. I think they would get along well, and Clara would. I would love to help, suggested Pedro, trying to make things easier for Lupita and also provide an opportunity for his daughter to take responsibility and interact more with Miguel. Lupita, moved by Pedro's thoughtfulness, felt a wave of gratitude. That would be wonderful, Mr. Pedro. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Miguel really likes Clara, she responded, a relieved and grateful smile lighting up her face. The next day, Lupita arrived at the restaurant for her first day of work, wearing her clean and well-ironed uniform. Clara was already in house, anxious and ready to spend the day with Miguel. We are going to have a lot of fun today, Miguel. I will show you some games and we can paint together, Clara said animatedly to the little boy who was observing her with curiosity and a slight smile. Miguel, are you going to stay with me while your grandmother works? It's going to be a special day. Okay, Clara continued, trying to hook the boy. Miguel just nodded and responded with a simple, this is one of the few words he knew, but enough to show his understanding. Meanwhile, in the restaurant, Lupita assumed her position at the cashier, a little nervous, but mainly excited to begin this new stage. The first customers began to arrive, and she served them with a shy smile, still getting used to the pace and procedures. During the morning, a man in a professional suit approached the checkout. He was a real estate agent, clearly on a lunch break, but he was facing problems with the card machine, which seemed to have lost internet connection. "It seems we will have to wait a moment. The machine is without signal," Lupita explained, trying not to show her concern for dealing with an unexpected situation. "Just on her first day without problems. I'm not in a hurry. It's always good to find a moment to." Breathing during work is not as calm being a real estate agent as it seems, the agent responded, his friendly tone helping to relieve Lupita's tension while they waited. He looked around, appreciating the decoration of the restaurant. "This is a nice place. You've been working here for a long time." "Oh, it's not. My first day. I am a friend of the owner, Pedro, and he decided to give me an opportunity to work here. I was in a quite difficult situation, and he and his daughter helped me a lot," Lupita responded, smiling nervously. "I am barely starting, but I'm happy to be here. First day good. Congratulations. We all started somewhere. No. And how is it going so far?" "Generally, the first day is the busiest and most difficult, whatever profession," he asked. He genuinely interested in her experience. Lupita felt every time more comfortable despite the small technical hiccup. "It's going well, thank you. I'm learning a lot," she shared, realizing that each interaction helped her feel more part of the team and more confident in her new role. While the machine cards finally re-established the connection, Lupita, perceiving an opportunity, hesitated before speaking. "Excuse me for asking, but since you are a real estate agent, I was thinking of finding a better place to live for my grandson and me. You would have something to rent that is accessible?" The agent, surprised by the coincidence, but happy to help, he smiled and took a card out of his wallet. "Of course, here's my card. Call me, and we can talk about what you need and what I have available. I'm sure we can find something that fits your budget," she said, handing him the card. After a day full of new experiences, Lupita called people they scheduled a visit to see a small house that seemed perfect for their needs. At the end of the day, Lupita, Clara, and Miguel were standing in front of a modest but cozy house that seemed to be exactly what Lupita wanted. The place was simple but clean and in a quiet neighborhood, ideal for raising Miguel. The boy was walking around the house, his eyes shining with excitement as he explored each corner of the small garden. I had never had anything like this, unless he could remember, since the brain does not usually store memories in early childhood. Lupita looked at Clara, who was smiling, and nodded. "It's decided. We'll stay here. Now we'll have our own house," she said, feeling a mixture of relief and joy. To the people signed the lease and began planning the move to their new home, grateful for the income that working at Pedro's restaurant provided. A few weeks later, Pedro's restaurant was closing. After a busy day, the chairs were raised on the tables, the last customers said goodbye, and the team began to clean the space. However, that night one table was still occupied. Pedro, Lupita, Clara, and Miguel sat together having a family meal, celebrating the changes that had never happened. "I thought we would all be here together as a family," said Pedro, looking around the table with a soft smile. "Lupita, you have become essential to the restaurant, and Clara, I am so proud of how you helped make all this happen." Clara laughed, taking Miguel's hand. "I just wanted to help Lupita and Miguel. They are my family now too. All this was very important for me, and I think the school helped me a lot in dealing with classmates and teachers." Lupita, with tears in the eyes, she added, "And I am so grateful for everything, for this work, for our new house, and most of all for you having welcomed me. Thank you very much for being like a second family to me. You truly understand me." They continued talking, sharing laughter and plans for the future. Miguel, now attending a school near his new home, was flourishing, discovering a new world away from the difficulties of the streets. Clara continued to divide her time between studies and helping in the restaurant during the holidays, dreaming of one day being able to do more for the community. Pedro, for his part, felt rejuvenated by the presence of Lupita and Miguel, bringing new energy to the restaurant and to his life, showing him the power of a second chance and compassion. Together, they formed a family that was not traditional, united not by blood but by respect, affection, and mutual gratitude, ready to face what the future book. Did you like this story? We ask you to consider leaving your like and subscribing to our channel, So you help us continue sharing exciting narratives almost every day. Don't forget to also watch the video that is about to appear on your screen. We greatly appreciate your support. See you in the next inspiring story.